Really hold on a second. Fantastic. Welcome everybody. Preamble, this scrutiny committee meeting is being conducted on a hybrid basis in accordance with the Local Government and Elections Wales Act 2021, which will operate alongside the Council's standing orders. The meeting is being live streamed to the public. Please can those attending keep your cameras on, but mute your microphones when you're not speaking to ensure there is no unnecessary background noise. And I also remind members to ensure the chat function is switched on and to use that facility to indicate to me when they wish to speak on a particular item. A recorded version of this meeting will be uploaded for public viewing as soon as possible after the meeting, whilst translation of the proceedings can be provided upon request. The images and sound recorded may also be used for training purposes within the council. Thank you. Okay, in terms of the agenda, apologies for absence. We've got apologies from Councillor Alex Payne.
That's the only apology, Chair.
That's the only apologies. Any other apologies from anybody? Okay, any declarations of interest?
I'd say comprehensive property.
Okay, noted from Councillor Thomas. I'll also declare interest because I'm working closely with the city, but as this is a decision-making forum, I'm going to continue accordingly. Any other declarations of interest? Okay, rapid rehousing transition plan then. So we are starting off with officer presentations. I will invite the cabinet member to speak first should you wish, and then pass on to whoever in whatever order as we go, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can keep it short and brief. What I don't want to do is overlap on the officer presentation, but in regards to the rapid rehousing transition plan, as you're all aware, it's, or some of you are aware of, it's a part of the Welsh Government ending homelessness broader strategy. It's a 5-year plan, and it's where local authorities essentially can't struggle to prevent homelessness, and they focus on settled housing, and that's working collaboratively with partners, not just the local authority alone. So that includes ourselves, the private sector, but we also have in Newport, as you know, it's a flagship location identified by Homeless at Rural Foundation, where Rural Family are pumping in resources and support to make this situation rare, brief, and unrepeated. So I invite, of course, Paul and David on that, and in terms of obviously statistics, figures, and questions that we will follow. I
think David's going to kick off the presentation, and we've got Brendan Nicola here as well to support to take us through the details.
I'll try not to kick off, but
Yes.
could we get the presentation, please? So I'm going to kind of set out the broader framework and the scope of the plan. Kath is going to talk a little bit more specifically around where we are, some statistics, and then Nick is going to give a brief case study just highlighting how elements of the plan and our approach to working with people can help people move on with their lives and move on from homelessness. So I think it's really, really important when we think about the rapid rehousing transition plan to recognise, whilst it was kind of initially conceived of as a 5-year plan, there is broad consensus now across the sector, including with Welsh Government, that actually whilst the ambitions of the plan are great and completely the direction of travel in which we need to be going, the reality is we are not going to be able to deliver all elements of the plan within 5 years. And that's really due to the broader pressures on the homelessness system, which in the main are outside the local authorities' control. So, for example, changes in policy and their impact on housing and the wider economic landscape and other pressures. As the Cabinet member has rightly pointed out, The plan forms part of Welsh Government's aspiration for homelessness to be rare, brief and unrepeated. So kind of sounds quite buzzwordy. What that really means in practice is that wherever possible, if someone is at risk of homelessness, services, the council and increasingly other public sector services work together to try and ensure that if it's at all possible, that homelessness is prevented, either by somebody sustaining their accommodation or moving to alternative accommodation. The briefness really means that if someone does become homeless, that period of homelessness is as short as possible before they're supported to move on into suitable accommodation. And unrepeated recognises the fact that many people become homeless as a result of things like trauma, and actually even once someone has moved on, there needs to be additional support to try and ensure that they've developed resilience against homelessness in the future. Our plan sets out our aims and objectives to support the move to a more trauma-informed service and our aspiration to best meet our citizens' housing and support needs by, wherever possible, providing the right accommodation at the right time. And as we've already said, the move towards rapidly housing will take local authorities across Wales beyond the life of the plan due to many factors. Just wanted to highlight our vision. It kind of picks up on a lot of what I've said already, but it probably bears repeating. Can we move to the next slide, please? I've managed to move to the next slide on my laptop and not on the screen, which isn't particularly helpful, is it? So a holistic and preventative housing advice and support service that empowers people in housing need to maximise their potential and to take control over their lives. So not only focusing on their housing and homelessness issue, but wherever possible, trying to ensure that they receive the support to address issues that have led them to that situation, but also to move on from it. And as we've spoken around, homelessness is rare, but where it does occur, people are supported to move as rapidly as possible into sustainable homes with appropriate support where required. The key themes of the plan, again, we'll have touched on many of this, is early intervention. Oh, sorry, can we move on again? I've really not got the handle on this, have I? Early intervention, prevention, advice and information. So one of the things we're really keen to do is upstream our service as much as possible. Oftentimes when people come to the council, our statutory duty kicks in when someone is homeless within 56 days. That can often be too late. At that point, the landlord's already decided they're going to evict someone, or their relationship with their parents has broken down beyond repair. So we want to upstream that as far as possible. Increase the supply and access to settled accommodation. We model what temporary accommodation looks like, so we can reduce cost, but also ensure that it really does provide environments and support services that can enable people to move on. Really ensuring we have the right support and tenancy sustainment services in place to ensure that council resources, but also the resources of our commissioned housing support services are properly planned and deployed, and that people have received all of the training they need to develop the new approach, and Kath will touch upon some of that in her presentation. And lastly, engagement and co-production. So within the development of this plan, there was a lot of engagement with colleagues from other organisations, as well as some work to co-produce things with people who've experienced homelessness. So I'm going to hand over to Kath now, who's going to talk a little bit about where we are in the lay of the land. Whilst we're looking at the plan today, there's been huge amounts of work that links in and forms part of the plan already. So we can move to the next slide.
Okay, so starting from the beginning, really, we've in order to respond to the housing crisis and the really changing nature of the housing landscape since the COVID pandemic, which probably started a bit before. In fact, we've had ongoing service transformation. Housing has become a transformation area within the council. We've restructured our frontline housing teams to ensure a focus on more trauma-informed services for citizens, There's essentially one member of staff that's available to support that person throughout the whole of their housing journey. So whereas in the past they might have approached what we were calling housing advice and prevention officer for advice. If that officer couldn't prevent their homelessness, they would be passed on to another officer within the team. And we felt that really wasn't trauma informed, because the system was having to repeat this situation over and over again to multiple individuals. So we pulled away a lot of those barriers now. We've got a team of 25 frontline officers that are responsible for the whole of the citizens' housing and journey, right the way into temporary accommodation if homelessness cannot be prevented, and supporting them to move on to settled accommodation. There have been a lot of initiatives to reduce spending across temporary accommodation in general, and we've been working with our housing association partners in particular to try and move people through the homelessness system as quickly as we possibly can, with the requisite support that's been identified that they need. We've looked to remodel some of the temporary accommodation, for example, Mission Court, which we recognise, very much served a purpose at a point in time, but didn't follow our aspirations for accommodation being trauma informed, and that has reduced a lot of costs for the authority, and will reduce a lot of costs going forward. We've joined Welsh Government's Leasing Scheme Wales initiative, which will be working with private sector landlords to lease properties from them for a period of time, and the council will be accommodating people within those properties. And we're looking to increase move on from people that have been in temporary accommodation and supported accommodation where they're ready to be rehoused. We've been able to tap into a lot of the Welsh Government funding that's become available. So that's some of the traditional funding that some of you will be aware of through social housing grant, and some of the new emerging housing funding streams like the TACP or Transitional Accommodation Capital Programme funding. Bit of a mouthful, that one. So we've been working really closely with our housing association partners to bring additional accommodation online. That's through new builds and purchasing off-the-shelf accommodation. We've also looked at our housing support grant funded services, which for the current financial year is a 9 million support grant from Welsh Government, to make sure that any contracts that were coming up for retendering were very much aligned to the authority's strategic priorities around homelessness, homelessness prevention, and making sure that supported to move on into suitable accommodation. We move to the next slide, please. We just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavour for the data that we're working with. There is some of this shared within the position paper, which is on page 69 of the pack. But the forecasted number of households that have approached the authority for advice and assistance because they're at risk of homelessness for 24-25, the forecast is 2,596 households, which is broadly comparable to the numbers that approached us for advice in the previous financial year. Again, the main reasons for homelessness remain very similar. Last year there was a slightly higher proportion of households that approached us for advice because they were going to be losing their private rented accommodation. But those top reasons that we've highlighted on the slide there broadly remain the highest reasons that people approach the authority for housing advice. Can we move to the next slide, please? We still have around 557 households in temporary accommodation across the city as of February this current year, which again is broadly comparable to last year, although slightly higher. Although we will stress that's predominantly because the demand for all forms of accommodation for single people is increasing. The good news is that the number of households with dependent children who are in temporary accommodation has reduced dramatically since the beginning of the current financial year. And that's been for a number of reasons. But we've been working again very closely with our housing association colleagues to make sure that there's the accommodation, there's the throughput coming through, and we've been prioritising moving families out of temporary accommodation or working with them to prevent homelessness where at all possible. And the taking advantage of the relevant grant streams that have been coming through Welsh Government has also helped with that. Another good news story is that the number of people that the authority has been able to accommodate who were previously sleeping rough has significantly increased. There were an average of 75 a month in the first quarter of the year, and that rose to 169 towards the end of the financial year. And again, that's been working very, very closely with our outreach teams, so primarily the Salvation Army and Cymraeg Women's Aid, to really make sure that we're engaging with some of the hardest to reach individuals in Newport to move them into temporary housing. And I've touched on the demand for accommodation of all types throughout the city for single people and the increase that we are facing there.
Kath, just before we move on, do you want to just touch on what we're seeing in terms of numbers sleeping out?
Yeah, we have weekly updates from our sleeper team around the numbers of people that are counted by our outreach teams as being sleeping out in the city. And that's reduced quite significantly down to sort of under 10 individuals reported at any one time. And we think one of the reasons for that, alongside a lot of partnership working that's been taking place, has been the setting up of a somewhere safe to stay hub, which is essentially a floor space that individuals can access overnight. And that's been running as a pilot since November last year.
Will that continue? Is it on a fixed term? I think I know what you mean.
It's going to be reviewed over the coming weeks,
Right.
and we'll be making recommendations for the future of that provision.
It's just some assurance that we are committed to sustaining, whether it's in that building or elsewhere, some models.
Something
It's making
that has that function.
It's making a huge difference.
Yeah.
It's not ideal. We wouldn't consider it to be suitable temporary accommodation, but actually having somewhere safe, warm and dry, people can come into, they can receive support and advice and begin that journey of assessment and engagement is really, really important. So we're committed to sustaining it.
Yeah, it really has to date. It's in the short space of time that it's been running, it really has met the aims and objectives of the service, as David said, in terms of engaging with people that we were previously finding it difficult to engage with. These are some of the most complex individuals in the city, and providing that assertive advice to people that the council might not have statutory duties towards, for reasons such as they have got a local connection with the city, etc. So we feel that it's definitely met its aims to date. Next slide, please. And you across to Nicola.
Just go through a case study with regards to a client that has been in service for quite a long time with us. I just want to caveat this, he is very, very complex needs. So JM, age 79, became homeless in 2021 after being evicted due to property damage and neglect in a housing association accommodation. He does struggle with alcoholism, hoarding and his mental health, and despite multiple services attempting to engage him, JM chose to sleep rough for several months in the city. He was eventually housed, but his hoarding made the accommodation unlivable, leading to multiple relocations for us to be able to deep clean the temporary accommodation, because the hoarding did become a fire hazard, not just to his, but to the other accommodations around as well. Several referrals were made across to adult services, hoarding intervention and health inclusion team, but again, with JM's mental health needs, his non-engagement persisted, resulting in discussions at multi-agency panel meetings. His memory issues led to further referrals into adult services, And he did have very long periods with us with non-engagement in temporary housing. So we were just using our outreach support services to provide humanitarian support for his welfare, just keeping him safe. JM's accommodation at Mission Court, which has been decommissioned now. So we did multiple case conferences with various services, and our main aim was to prevent him going back to rough sleeping on the streets, because he would choose that take it apart from taking alternative accommodation, unfortunately. So it was really resource intensive to get him moved. But we did focus on finding a suitable accommodation, which is within one of our supported accommodations. So JM has now moved into specialised complex needs supported housing, where he is adjusting really well, building friendships and engaging really positively. This success is achieved through partnership working and our trauma-informed practice.
Thanks, Nick. I think one really important thing to highlight there is thinking about rapid rehousing as a concept. Actually, for many of the clients that we're working with TA, what we would consider to be very small steps are hugely significant, and the length of time it can take to build trust and rapport to support someone to find a housing option that they're willing to accept due to often decades of trauma. We talk about rapid rehousing, but a lot of this is kind of quite slow and painstaking work with individuals.
I noticed, I mean, this gentleman is quite old, isn't he?
Yes.
I gather that the average age of death, people living rough on the streets, is something like 43, 46, something like that. Do we have many people as old as him who are living rough?
No.
No, it's very much
So he was a particular challenge.
Yeah.
Are you working with is there a specialist nurse as well for people living rough? We got that from the health board at the moment.
yeah, we work with the health inclusion team who
Right.
provide a range of interventions, and I think it's a live discussion as well as how we can improve access to healthcare, particularly mental health care for some of our clients who've got greater needs.
Yeah, presentation. Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, over to the committee then for questions. Any volunteers to go first? Councillor Rees.
I can just refer you to the page 76 of the report, where you've got a breakdown of rough sleepers accommodated at month end. So we go from April 24 through to Jan 25. Just for the purposes of people like me not too familiar, first of all, could you go through what the options are? Because I have no idea, for example, what somebody in modular accommodation is. But also then, I want to really look at why we've had a doubling in the numbers, the grand total from September to October, because it seems to be sort of coming down quite nicely, and all of a sudden it doubled as we went from September to October. So if somebody can shed some light on those, please.
Yeah, if I take you through the types of TA and CAP, maybe you can pick up on the trends. So bed and breakfast, that would be your more traditional kind of thing. It's called bed and breakfast, but it's more likely to be like a high street hotel type placement rather than a traditional kind of bed and breakfast. And the second one should probably be private provider of TA. So that's a private company, private landlords who develop properties in a kind of a bit of a hybrid between being a private landlord and being like a hotel. So it's lightly purchased accommodation, that's run by a private company rather than kind of a hotel.
They provide support.
They'll provide assertive housing management, so things like having someone visiting every day, security, cameras, things like that.
Right.
So it's not support, but it's got protective factors. Hostel, that would be one of our supported accommodations that we use as temporary accommodation. Modular, that was Mission Court, so that was 15 units in Hill that was set up as a response to COVID using modern methods of construction. PSL, that's the private sector leasing scheme. So that's where the council has leased property from private landlords, which we use as temporary accommodation. And shared B&B is where there are shared houses that we're using to place people in. So there's lots of different configurations that we use to provide TA, and they all have different pluses and minuses and different costs attached to them. Broadly speaking, if you look at that, you'd say that bed and breakfast and modular would have been the most expensive forms of TA. And Kath, do you want to answer the flow question?
Yeah, I sort of touched on it in the presentation, and I think there are a number of factors, but I think primarily it's around the increased focus interventions around people that are sleeping rough. So I think that is not an exhaustive list, but just to give you some examples, we've got a fortnightly multidisciplinary team whereby some of the most complex individuals that all agencies are struggling to sort of move into accommodation meet, and they discuss individuals in depth, share accountability for both their housing and other journeys, and review those on a regular basis. Within housing, we've set up a regular weekly meeting with all housing individuals across the advice and prevention team and the temporary accommodation team. Our Salvation Army outreach partners now also attend that, along with Cabana, we would say, because they've got specialisms in women who are sleeping rough with very, very complex needs. We've been able to sort of come around the table and find solutions, discuss those cases on an individual basis. I think the Somewhere Safe to Stay Hub that we mentioned earlier, so it has really achieved its objectives. You know, they were people that we were trying to engage with, or our outreach partners were trying to engage with, that we as an authority were struggling with. So I think having officers and our partners be available in that facility has really helped to get people sort of engaged. We can give them that assertive housing advice and really assess their needs and move them into temporary accommodation.
That particular venue, where does it sit within the reports of different types of accommodation here?
That's not considered a temporary accommodation.
Okay, yeah, right.
Can I just get some clarity on the same numbers? So these are not new presentations, are they? So we haven't had 138 presentations during October. We've increased from 69 to 138. Is that right?
It's very much, the numbers reflect the number of people
Either
that we're engaging
at
with
the end of
who have
yeah.
been rough sleeping that we've managed to place into temporary accommodation.
So the fact that we've dropped 30 odd from July to August then, so we've gone 95 to 66. Would those 30 have likely been included and come back indoors in October, potentially? And that, yeah,
They could well have. I think it's probably also worth saying that September, October, two other things were happening at that time. So we had early prison release, and so more people, it wasn't huge in Newport.
Yeah.
We also had really embedding a new service that was focused on working with people with multiple and complex needs and temporary accommodation. So that what that has done is, I'm probably extrapolating slightly here, but my sense is that that's enabled us to get more people in, begin that engagement early, but also to ensure that they're able to sustain that accommodation. Essentially, we have new services. It's 7 or 8 officers working on a multi-agency basis. So we've got GDAS, the Substance Misuse Service, and Gwent Mind. We've got FOBL services focusing on people with experience of criminal justice service and some specialist women's services. There's much more kind of protective factor than going around that. So you're not seeing people falling in and out of temporary accommodation so much.
And so we've got 169 people in temporary accommodation at the end of January who would have been considered rough sleepers then. But is that a fairly wide definition of rough sleepers? Because we wouldn't have had 70 people on the streets sort of sleeping when you mentioned sort of prison leavers. So would we assume that they've come out of prison, they wouldn't have accommodation, we've accommodated them, therefore they're not sleeping rough.
Yeah, it's a really wide definition. I think it's more about having a history of rough sleeping as opposed to
Right, okay.
always being a rough,
Yeah.
someone actually sleeping rough.
Should we be looking at these figures in a very positive way? Because it's actually, we've set out to do this to engage with people, and hopefully now a very small percentage of them will ever end up in the similar position, and it's actually an achievement.
That's exactly how there's the first kind of stepping stone for these clients is being able to get in somewhere and sustain it.
Yeah.
Without having a home, you can't. Maslow's hierarchy, isn't it? You've not got that your basic needs met. It's really difficult to make progress in any other domain.
It's definitely positive. I think the rapid rise in those numbers though, and those setting aside the definition, those are much more likely to be complex challenges for us. Perhaps give an indication of why so much money is being, the spending in this area has gone off the chart in the last few years. See those underlying pressures.
You mentioned Wings Mine there. Now, Newport Mine have actually become aware that they feel the funding has dropped and there's some services which they're going to have to suspend. So where does this fit, in the services that we previously provided to people with mental health?
Sorry, when I say Grant Mine, I mean Newport Mine.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Sorry. So
it's my fault. No, I said that was my fault.
Have we been able to increase the funding to them, or did it actually, was it lowered for some of their services?
You'd be able to answer that one, Kath, in more detail. I'm saying maybe a service.
No, I don't think at this point. We're constantly working with providers, if possible, to remodel services if we're finding that need has changed.
Right.
I'm not aware that we've reduced any.
I think obviously their funding comes from a number of different sources.
There's some of it comes from the council.
Yeah, some of it comes from
So it's probably different parts.
some of it comes from the council, some of it comes from the city, but some of it comes from. So I think their overall package might be, but I don't think USB is this year.
Right, okay.
Okay.
And when we go to the advice and information and interventions, is all of that provided by the council directly, or some is that coming from other third sector organisations?
Advice Bureau, which is model thinking.
Yeah.
It's citizens advice I was actually interested in.
So the housing advice around our statutory duties and homelessness prevention is provided by us. We then commission a whole range of services through Housing Support Grant.
Right.
It's working with people who have got housing related support needs. In terms of citizens advice specifically, we commission them to provide through Housing Support Grant. And from a housing perspective, we're actually working with them at the moment to look at how we can fund them to support us with achieving some of these objectives.
Okay.
So really important part.
I do know they're very keen to continue all of the work and engagement that they can do with the council. Yeah. These are, I do recognise these are uncertain times for not just for us as councils, as local authorities, but also for the third sector.
Part of our long-term plan around homelessness prevention is to work with as many agencies as possible to get the message out there around, if you're threatened with homelessness, please contact us as soon as you possibly can to see if we can work with you to prevent homelessness.
Yes. Thank you.
Go back to Councillor Rees, just to finish off the point you want to make, and I'm aware that Councillor Kirby's waiting as well, and Councillor Straits.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back, David, to what you said about the D2 probably go the private DB. I'm just using those as an example, but this stretches out really to the whole of the people that we put into temporary accommodation. Where, from the council's perspective, does the responsibility for safeguarding sit? Because obviously you're taking vulnerable adults here, for example, as we were saying, potentially vulnerable adults off the street, put them into various different types of accommodation. Does the council have the duty of care for safeguarding, or is it done? You said there are private companies going around these private bed and breakfasts. Where does that sit? Because I said it's not just these; it's the whole thing of temporary accommodation. And if that is at the doorstep of the council, then that does open sort of quite a wider area of looking after people.
Yeah, and so ultimately safeguarding is everybody's responsibility. So it stretches to everybody working with that person. You know, where we are working with bespoke TA providers, then they develop their own processes, and that's we have agreements with them in place to manage that.
Okay, Councillor Cleverly.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions. Thank you. Right, you mentioned temporary accommodation. How long, if you know it, is temporary accommodation? Because I know some families has been in temporary accommodation for like 18 months or more. And I had one young boy who was 19 put in temporary accommodation, and his mental health really went down living there because there was other people in the house. Oh, there was other 5 people, I think, and because some of their actions where they were having all-night parties, drugs, girls in, you know, he said they were having sex on the stairs. You know, it's just horrendous for him, and his mental health really went down. You know, so that was the one question. And my other question is the HMOs. Have we got any idea on exactly how many? Because it seems that there is more and more being opened every day. And the other question I've got is the housing office. Is it still based in the library on the 2nd floor, or is it anywhere else? Okay, thank you. I'll leave it to you.
Thanks, Councillor Cleverly. Sorry, just, in terms of sort of average time in temporary accommodation, you'll pick up the sort of standard stuff. The HMO stuff probably isn't for you in particular, unless a cabinet member wants to send it. There is a list of HMOs currently licensed on the council website.
I would say that, you know, this isn't, that those are two kind of separate issues.
They are.
We're happy to
Yeah.
There is obviously a register in the public domain regards to HMOs.
They'll be much bigger than this, than what they.
That's right.
Yeah.
Let's just come back to this topic. Obviously, we're focusing on.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. In
How
terms of
we
relevance,
transition plan, and what we don't want to do is progress the topic at hand. We're happy to answer Councillor Debbie's question out of this meeting.
Yeah, no, and the point I was going to come to is focus on the HMOs that you are using that are referenced on page 76. Those was what I wanted to get to.
Should we take it? So in terms of the length of time, so people spend in temporary accommodation, I think it's probably best that we provide the committee with some of that, because it is really, really dependent on the client group and size of the household, etc., etc. The way to think about it, though, from my perspective, is that our duty to provide temporary accommodation remains in place until such time that we're able to discharge it. So we could discharge it because we've been able to make a suitable offer of settled accommodation. That could be with a housing association, it could be in a private rented sector, or because, you know, there have been issues in temporary accommodation and that person has lost their accommodation due to their actions. I think one of the key points is that this is why we're so focused in on prevention. Temporary accommodation is emergency accommodation. It really is a last resort where people have nowhere else to go. And this is why it's kind of so important our efforts are focused on prevention, particularly because of the length of times that people can spend there. I think particularly single people now, if you look at the numbers of people in temporary accommodation, about 73% are single adults or childless couples, and our greatest pressure point is 1-bed accommodation. So it's a supply and demand situation there. Obviously can't focus in on specific cases, but what I would say is that as part of our restructure of the service, which Kath touched upon earlier, we really have focused in on temporary accommodation and introduced more resource to effectively manage that accommodation and introduce new kind of policies to enable us to try and do that as effectively as possible. But it always really is a is a balancing act. And just move to question 3 and then circle back to HMOs. So yes, housing is still at the Central Library Museum. There is an aspiration, it's worth saying, to look at how over the next kind of year we can begin to offer more services in areas of the community. We want to try and reach people earlier. So sometimes I think coming into the library can be, it's a journey, but it can also be quite, it can also not be ideal for people that start their journey to engage with it. It's quite a formal process. So we're still there, we will remain there, but we also want to do more outreach too. In terms of the HMO line there, there's about 55 units of accommodation used as HMOs that are leased by the council. And I don't know how that translates into numbers of properties off the top of my head. So that'd be bedrooms, but we can certainly provide that, Councillor Cleverly, in our feedback to the group. That's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Most helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Cleverly. Councillor Screen.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I just say that you know, this is a very challenging area. You know, I do appreciate the challenges that you know, the council and the team are facing. You know, it's not just a Wales; it's a national crisis. But I moved on to the conclusions because I thought they were quite interesting. Conclusions arising from the data on page 42. And there were 2 paragraphs there that caught my eye. First of all, Newport has experienced an increase in Section 21 notices. You know, obviously partly because of the changes to the legislation, also because of the economic pressures on landlords who are leaving the market, selling up, leaving the market, and I think that, you know, that has a big impact on housing. And the second paragraph was challenges to achieving the rapid rehousing plan, and it mentions the council not being a stockholding local authority also presents challenges. And I'm just wondering whether, if Newport did become a stockholding local authority, would that help? Would that be a positive movement, and would that help in a sense to alleviating, you know, the crisis in homelessness? Okay, thank you.
That's a very good question, Screen. And with regards to obviously being a non-stockholding authority, I mean, we're not ruling out anything, but we're exploring all options. And I can't definitively answer today.
Except you mentioned it in the conclusions.
So,
You did bring it up in the conclusion. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. In terms of becoming a stockholding authority, right? We're not ruling out anything at the moment. So if we were to become a stockholding authority in the future, it's not something we're completely ruling out. Down to the screen. So exploring all options. Everything's on the table right now. Okay.
Very much.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Councillor Screen?
No, that's fine. I just thought I'd chuck it in there because it was in the report, and it seemed to me to be quite an important issue in moving towards alleviating homelessness. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Screen. Councillor Linton.
Thank you, Chair. Just regarding where does the sofa surfers come into the homelessness? Because on the form it says, have you got accommodation in Newport or within the council? Well, obviously they're sofa surfing, they're going from one accommodation, give that address, then they're kicked out, and then they moved on to another address. So where does the sofa surfers sit in with this accommodation and getting on the ladder?
Yeah. So when we're looking at temporary accommodation, that doesn't include people who are sofa surfing. In many situations, we would owe that client group a statutory duty and may have a duty to offer them accommodation. So really, you know, most people who find themselves in that situation would approach the local authority, and then we'd need to make those assessments to establish whether a statutory duty is owed, and then if a statutory duty is owed, temporary accommodation could potentially be offered. But it's all about that our statutory assessments council in Linton, rather than us kind of, you know, accounting for them anywhere else, if that makes sense.
Sorry, yes, yeah, yeah, it does. Another, just a quick point, I'm trying to look now. What percentage have we got? This is your, in the minority groups, we got a percentage of an estimated 13% of the population for ethnic minorities, but there's no percent, and it says there's a greater burden with the NAS, with NAS. No, there's no percentage on that.
So the NAS accommodation, so we don't provide NAS accommodation, that's provided by the Home Office. We have been an asylum dispersal area, yeah. So depending on what a decision is, we may have a duty to someone leaving that system. So that's all that's saying there. Any assessment we do would look at whether someone is eligible for assistance or not. That is how we would look at kind of immigration status.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Pym.
Hi there, Chair. Just a declaration of interest, as you're aware, I work for the fire service full time. We often turn up to a lot of temporary accommodation where the fire alarms have gone off for different reasons. Quite a few properties that we've been turning up to over the past few years have been an assisted living styled accommodation, so a HMO, but with somebody on site 24/7 during the day. They're there to assist with basic household tasks like cooking, cleaning, and managing their budgets. And then in the evening, there's somebody there throughout to keep an eye on the tenants. Is this something that the council, with this scheme, is this something that you directly are linked into? Or are these private companies that you work in partnership with, or are they just a standalone service?
So in terms of temporary accommodation, we don't run any assisted living services. We do commission supported housing through the housing support grant.
And that's popular.
That's a range of providers, that's a popular range provider. We commission a range of providers based on their specialism, Councillor Penn. So, you know, we'll commission services for young people, we'll commission services specifically for women, we'll commission services specifically for people with mental health conditions, really the whole kind of gambit of housing related support needs.
Okay, and just one other question, Chair. That you did stress that you always try and find the right accommodation where and when you can. I think an issue that we do have in Newport is a lack of right accommodation. I think we've all experienced it in our own wards where young families, especially with young children, have often been positioned up on the top floors of flats, also in the attic space of many large properties that you find on the main roads, and also lots of elderly people who again are positioned upstairs in buildings and have mobility issues. Is there a long-term strategy as to how we can alleviate this issue of finding the right type of accommodation for those who are vulnerable, but also that need extra support, especially young parents with lots of kids?
So I think there's a couple of elements there. So firstly, the council will shortly be taking its housing prospectus through the democratic process. The housing prospectus is based on the local housing market assessment, which has been completed and basically tells us, based on Welsh Government methodology, what the housing need in the city is and what it's likely to be over the next 10 to 20 years. That's a really, really important document because the prospectus is how we communicate to our RSL partners the type of accommodation that we need to be provided. So trying to get that configuration of the new supply coming through, whether that's one bedroom accommodation that we've already discussed, or older people's accommodation, as you've touched on, Councillor Pym, or even adapted properties for people with mobility issues. So that's coming through at the moment. I think then in terms of kind of what we've not really mentioned it explicitly, but is inherent in the issues we've been discussing today, is trying to ensure that people's are able to access housing advice and housing support at the earliest opportunities. So they can be guided through some of these processes and trying to get that kind of configuration right and trying to get that matching sorted. What I would say is because of the, if you touch on it yourself, because of the immense pressure on housing in the city, you know, it's really challenging to meet those requirements in the short term. But I think as we get the prospectus and we drive development through that, and we continue to implement some of all of the proposals that we have in this policy and elsewhere to improve housing advice and housing support, that will enable us to gradually get closer and closer to that scenario where we are able to hopefully more effectively enable people to match people who are coming through the homelessness processes to property.
Okay, just for information, that prospectus is coming to scrutiny in June. Yes, yes, yeah. Sorry, Councillor Pym, to carry on.
I've got another question, but I'm happy to wait until it come.
No, that's right. Go on. Yeah.
Oh no, we often see on social media the promotion, or not the promotion, but the negative comments raised with the lack of accommodation for our veterans, people who served in the military. Within the report, there was no up-to-date data or information as to how many currently homeless veterans that we have in Newport. Is there any way of gauging or collecting that information to find out what the situation is in Newport? It's a very political issue at the moment, and it's used an awful lot to kind of beat the local authority with a stick as a constant criticism that we prioritise ethnic minorities and immigrants over veterans. But within the report, there is no up-to-date information on how many veterans that we've got currently sleeping homeless or in temporary accommodation in Newport.
Yeah, so numbers are and have consistently been very, very low indeed. What we can do, Councillor Pym, though, is we can ask the team to have a look at it and come back with a figure for committee. That'd be absolutely fine.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Weeks.
Thank you, Chair. Mentioned in the report, and you've made mention as well to the rough sleeper task force that's going to about and dealing with the people who actually sleep in rough on the streets. Assuming that's obviously funded by ourselves in Newport City Council. Was there an impact on that rough sleeping task force when Pride and Pearl stopped doing what they were doing, going out and about with talking to the homeless and helping the homeless people?
So the rough sleeping task force is something slightly different. The rough sleeping task force is more of a multi-agency forum, so it's people talking to one another. In terms of services to people sleeping rough, we commissioned Salvation Army as our key outreach provider, and they are funded through housing support grants, so grant funding, and they are out 6 days a week now, isn't it? Working with people directly on the street, but also 5 days a week they're in the Somewhere Safe to Stay hub. So people going to the hub are agreed to by a support worker there. There's also services, touch on the complex needs service, but services we commission in terms of GDAS, bringing drug and alcohol services to people sleeping rough, which again are commissioned through housing support grant, along with some health money. And lastly, we have a Housing First service in Newport, and Housing First is a specific housing intervention for people with a long history of homelessness. That's run by Pobble, and that's commissioned by Welsh Government. So these services tend to be grant funded. In terms of our interactions with those services and Pride and Pill, I've certainly had nothing raised to me about, you know, impacts there from those services. It's not a question we've asked specifically, so it's purely anecdotal based on information that's been fed back from those services. And what I would say is that an outreach service works in kind of a slightly different way in terms of it's very evidence-based in terms of the assessments they'll make about whether someone is sleeping rough that night. But certainly nothing's been fed back formally. We can ask those questions again and feedback to you as a committee. Not a problem at all.
Pick up on that. We talk of very low numbers of people actually that we believe that there are people are homeless and sleeping rough at night. I think we mentioned is an average of 10, is it, or 11? And yet we seem to have quite a lot of support in place for just this small number of people. Are we admitting that there's maybe a lot more people that are actually sleeping rough at night that we don't possibly know about, that these agencies like Salvation Army and Pride and Pill used to are actually dealing with, and but maybe they're just not presenting themselves to us to say, look, I could do with some help. Is that the case, do you think?
There is an app though, just on that thing. There is an app called Scrutiny where you can actually report, you know, homelessness, etc. And we are, you know, an evidence-led authority. I mean, we can't go off here, say, unfortunately. And what you find is you come across people that are genuinely sleeping rough, and some are not sleeping rough. When you have conversations, you actually find out that you do have a settled home to stay in, and you just need support. So again, if David wants to sort of elaborate on that.
Yeah, no, that'd be good. So I think there's 2 points there, Councillor Reeves. I think the first point is there's always flow. So it's not, you know, people are moving in and out of rough sleeping. So actually, you know, you can caseloads move and changes, as you'd imagine. I think the second point is that if we look at the Salvation Army service or the Housing First service, for instance, you know, one of the key things that we change in terms of commissioning Salvation Army is in the past, not much in Newport, but elsewhere, you'd often have an outreach service who just dealt with someone when they were on the street, get into accommodation, and that support goes. And that's really risky because often you've developed a relationship with that person, and there's a lot of trust there. It can be really scary when you've been out for a long period of time. Suddenly have a room and it's completely outside your frame of reference. So with Salvation Army, their role is to work with people whilst they're sleeping rough, but to also continue working with them when they move into accommodation. So actually it's a more elongated process. So the actual kind of caseload that they're dealing with at one time is much more than 10 people maybe on the street.
But it is, I mean, it is a lot of resource, but these are complex needs, and also you can see from those numbers going in, if that resource was there, that 10 would soon shoot up really high. So as you said, it was not a constant 10, although there are a couple of hardcore things that resource is taking people, but it's a lot, you know, as example, there's lots of examples like that. You know, it's not really just about rocking up and saying, do you know, actually the point you know, it's really, it is intensive. You know, if you looked at a unit cost, it would probably be quite challenging, but it's difficult end.
Is it a fair assumption to say then that figure of 10 is just really the people we know about, and it could be a much wider problem?
Those are the people who are assessed as, you know, on that night and through a process of verification, you can say,
if anything, in comparison, you know, as well councils, ours tends to out for more than that. You know, I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's a lot closer, a lot more thorough than some of these things.
Yeah,
So we do have a system here.
I say don't take it as a criticism.
No.
As an authority, we're going above and beyond where we probably need to be because we want to try and catch.
But also,
Catch many people as we can.
in terms of sort of, you know, what perception maybe.
Yes, yeah.
One is it is perhaps not everybody see maybe street begging or we got you know, we don't have issues with that. But also, these figures have improved a lot in the last few months, haven't they? So you know, that's another thing to take.
Is it right to assume then, actually that group at the end towards whatever page it was on now, we're actually still continuing to provide services to a lot of those people. So there's no way it's 10. It's actually more like 189 or a big proportion of 189. It might only be a bit of intervention or a bit of support advice they need.
But the risk is they slip back.
But
and
the
that's what-
risk is they slip back, so it's worth the investment in a larger number.
100%. The investment in trying to keep people in is almost the most important thing. It's once someone's in, the last thing you want is someone to fall back.
Yes, a question I sort of, obviously I represent the city centre ward. We've got a big proportion of the house and multiple occupation. We've seen massive changes in the city centre since I've been representing it. We've got all of these, what was years ago, we had shops in the town centre, as people constantly remind me, but we also had empty spaces above them, and there's been initiatives by Welsh Government to turn those into accommodation. But I'm wondering, we're looking at the long term, aren't we, in what sort of housing and accommodation that we can provide across the whole city. Some of it might be on the rural edges or in the busier centre. But I mean, it does worry me a bit. I know the biggest demand is men over 24 years old, but generally young, and they're single. And I'm wondering if we're working with planning to actually think about what we are able to encourage within the city centre, because the city centre isn't universally the right place for people with, say, 3 children. Even if there was accommodation there, it wouldn't be right. But on the other hand, I don't think that we should be creating spaces in the city centre that are only 1-bedroom bed sits, So are we thinking about this in the long term? Because I know some of this is outside your ability to legislate or to enact local housing rules on. But I do think it's really important that we think about this, that we don't sort of create a space which is more likely to be less family friendly because all we've got is living here is young men.
I think that's one of the things we constantly have to be vigilant about. So obviously there's work going on with the city centre placemaking plan to really try and create a vibrant, sustainable city centre. And we're really plugged in with Tracy Brooks and Andrew Ferguson and other colleagues around that. And actually all of I think part of the idea of bringing Saeed in as the cabinet member for planning and housing gets those 2 things together. And I think when we think more widely around, the developments that we through ourselves and social housing grant and things like that, one of our key priorities is to create sustainable communities. So they're going to meet our housing needs, but also be sustainable into the future, and places where people want to be and places where people want to live. So it's always juggling about 7 priorities at once, but sustainable communities is a bedrock of what we want to achieve.
Just on to, a lot of it was, I think, within Councillor Clark's portfolio, but of course I work alongside him. He's obviously responsible for region, but we're currently working on a developers forum where we want to involve ourselves, representatives from the Welsh Government, private sector, and also, estate agencies. We want to, sort of work differently and focus not just on the city centre, but the city as a whole. And of course, as you said, Councillor Thomas, there is a strain on single individuals, particularly men. And it has, it's an issue we need to address. But in terms of the 1-bed lets, we are trying to identify plots of land as well. So not just local authorities, but also we're working with, the Welsh Government, the health authority, etc. And we are thinking of ways in, addressing that problem. We don't have a simple solution to it, unfortunately. It's something that we are working on. Okay.
Councillor Pym, please raise your hand.
Yes, Chair. No, I do agree with a lot of the points that Kate raised there. I think it's the challenge. I mean, being homeless is an incredibly cruel situation to be in, and we should be doing everything we can to avoid people falling into homelessness or becoming homeless. But it is apparent, have been apparent over the past few years, the amount of people within the city centre hanging around during the day and in the evenings that are either living in the city centre or they've got nowhere to go. And it is a deterrent, I think, to a lot of people visiting the city centre at certain times of the day. And it is important to have a vibrant and functioning city centre. So it is that balance. And one of the reasons, from what I can gather, the reason why there's such concentrations of vulnerable people within the city centre is because a lot of the services are based there. You just mentioned the placemaking strategy and plan there. Is the positioning of these services and the planning permission that is granted, is this factored into the homeless strategy and the long-term ambition of the council in terms of how they maintain that balance of having services that are central to people who have limited access to transport, and also ensuring that the city centre is functioning as it should be?
Paul, I think you're probably best positioned to answer that, but before you answer it, I just want to mention that a lot of these properties, as we know, are privately actually owned.
Yes,
and
yes.
That's the biggest obstacle and challenge. But I do know that, you know, the team are working on ways in negotiating and communicating with private landlords to sort of address those problems through, you know, potentially compulsory purchase orders, etc. I think, Paul, if you want to come in and sort of touch on that.
I think, as the cabinet member says, that, you know, a lot of the tools aren't, you know, not in our control, so that is some of the challenges. But you know, these are factors being taken part of the placemaking plan, which I think itself comes to scrutiny at some stage shortly as well. So there'll probably be more time to hear that at that stage, which is, you know, it's a recognised aspect of that we want to deal with.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Can I ask a couple? So, in terms of outcomes, how do we know how this, when and if and how this plan will be successful? So what measures have we got in place to sort of look at success and how we're achieving? And along the same point, really, because in part, if you read the vision which you presented, which is, you know, we're probably not far off from achieving our vision, I would say, in terms of the way that we've transformed the service to deliver those things. The challenge isn't the vision, it's the numbers in reality. So taking those two in context, really, you know, how are we measuring success and outcome?
So I think the key indicators are statutory homelessness indicators ultimately. So we have a range of indicators that we report back to Welsh Government that look at our numbers coming through the homelessness system, and then our effectiveness in terms of homelessness prevention, homelessness relief, which is talk about, and then the number, our discharge from temporary accommodation, which is a terrible phrase, but essentially means how many people where we've placed into temporary accommodation and accepted a full duty have then moved on into suitable accommodation. So for me, those are the key measurements, because ultimately that gives us an indication of how healthy the system is. Are we being more effective to divert people, and are we seeing the numbers coming through into TA reducing, and then versus the numbers that have moved on from TA increasing proportionately? The way we currently measure that is that we have a range of metrics that we can report back to Welsh Government, but we also have a monthly performance review meeting that I chair. We have all of the managers from housing there, all attends to. We look at all of our performance data in the bounds, and that gives us a really kind of clear indication of where we're going. And those metrics, some of those metrics are also included in the housing community service plan, so we then communicate them back out externally to our communities, to the council, and obviously to you guys through Scrutiny.
So we've got the data, have we got targets on the data? So, you know, by this point, we want to, yeah, I know that prevention is 52%, for example. Do we want that to be 60 by X and 70 by dot or whatever? You know, are those all in place and agreed as well?
They are in place and agreed. One thing I would say about that is we're just going through a bit of refresh at the moment. So because of some of the interventions that we put into place, the flow of people into TA has begun to decrease. So what we need to do is just re-look at our targets based on that new flow. It's now been about 3 months. We have service targets, and I think most importantly, at an individual officer base, all of our frontline officers now have clear individual targets about our expectations in terms of the number of cases they'll prevent and move on from TA, and that's reported back to them on a monthly basis as well, so they can track progress. The last thing I'd say there is we're also in the process of just ensuring that our support providers have a clear target in relation to homelessness prevention too. So alongside all of the stuff that they feed in, there's a direct link back to our key priority around prevention.
I think James, one of the things that the budget setting process is that this year there's 3 million overspent in this. How is it 1.8 next year?
Where I'm going.
So that is that projection, that
Yeah.
continuous improvement, and so that is what's factored in there. But again, there are these risks because sometimes it feels David's area, every time we start to get ahead of it, then something else comes out. With early Christmas release, we've had, and then so there's a new source for all those numbers to come from. So we are projecting, we are basing our movement next year on, gradual continuous performance improvement across the board.
Yeah.
That's driving forward, not saying hard targets, but what we're doing in a micro.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of took my next question really, which was, how do we make sure that those targets are achievable? And sort of following on from that a little bit, because if you're working in a trauma-informed way, you have to be very careful about putting targets on people to achieve numbers that don't impact on the outcomes on the people that you're delivering services to. So how do you strike the balance between the two, I guess?
So I think there's, firstly, providing the right service first time and focusing on prevention and working with that person. By achieving that outcome, if you do it in the right way, you've worked in a trauma-informed approach. I think as well, we mentioned that we are constantly looking at how we can reconfigure temporary accommodation. And one of the key things we're keen to do there is increase support going on into those units so we can reduce housing management costs. So really trying to shift the service people are receiving is much more based on support and a trauma-informed approach rather than a hard housing management approach, because you can fund support through grant income rather than housing benefit income. There's a saving to the council.
Great, thank you. And then in terms of sort of governance of the plan, the plan suggests that the Strategic Housing Forum, is that right? Yeah, Strategic Housing Forum sort of leads that. And I know either the lead or a cabinet member chairs that. That meets twice a year. Is that enough? And what is the impact of other members on there? And how are they supporting the council to achieve the goals that we want to achieve? And how are we holding them to account? And I'm particularly thinking about the RSL.
Yeah, so there's been strategic housing reform. Carlson Table hasn't met for a little while, and that's really because Saeed and I have been doing a lot of work since he's been in place to think about some of the ways in which he wants to kind of encourage accountability across the sector. So that's an ongoing conversation. We're just kind of coming to the end of that, I think, really, aren't we? So I think you'll see some movement in that regard in the next month or two.
Internally we have the monthly, meetings, David, to, and again, I attend them most times now. So we've got to focus. So it's not just a matter of waiting till we get to the formal governance review. We're doing that work in between.
It's probably just also worth adding to that point that obviously this plan forms part of our wider housing transformation work, and we have a monthly board meeting. It's looking at all elements of the housing transformation plan. And alongside our performance meetings, that's scrutinised through internal challenge reviews, and then again comes up through our service plans, and up to you guys as having the ability to scrutinise some of that as well.
So if the Strategic Housing Forum hasn't met for a while, probably there aren't many active working groups coming out from that. I mean, there was the sort of homelessness task force, end rustic task force. There was a housing supply one and a prevention group. So those continue, and the plan sort of suggests additional subgroups will be developed. Have there been any developed, or are there any plans to develop them? You know, given this plan is effectively sort of 3 years old, you would have expected to see some other things sort of coming out of that.
Yeah, so I think those three groups are still meeting. The prevention one, I should say, has been driven more by Homewards now, because it needs to be more of a collaborative group. So they've started an early prevention pilot meeting based out of Moormeady Primary School. There's some quite innovative work to work with parents really early on, rather than working with us when things have come to crisis point. Better words. Yeah. The other, another key meeting, Kath mentioned this, is the weekly rush sweeping meetings that we set up as a result of the task force. So that is attended by council managers, but also Salvation Army, and also Cavanagh as key partners there. We're always looking to
Please go to that as well.
so please don't go to that one, they'll go to the task force, as well as the kind of the multi-agency team that came up with the task force too. So there's a whole range of partnership arrangements that are ongoing and feeding into all of this. We're actually kind of just trying to take stock at the moment, just to make sure we haven't got too many, and we can make sure they're rationalised, because really where we want to get is to a place where you've got just a really clear oversight at all stages, and people aren't doubling up and duplicating effort.
Yeah, and there's always a risk that you end up having meetings with the same people,
100%.
get the same people around the table,
100%.
on different forums, and they become talking jobs, don't they? And so it's great to see, it's great to see Newport being one of the homeless pilot areas, if that's the right sort of term to use, and them being involved and obviously heading up the prevention group. How is that going, and is that having an impact, or will it have an impact?
Yeah, I think Homewards has done some really good things so far. So I'd say a couple of key highlights. Firstly, the joint strategic needs assessment for women, particularly those with more complex needs, has pulled together a strategy and an action plan as to how we can improve outcomes for that client group. There's outcomes for us, but there's outcomes for a range of partners. And I think really importantly, that was pulled together by public health. So it's really taken a public health approach, and for a lot of these issues, it's a public health issue almost more than the housing issue. There's also been some really good work to develop trauma-informed training for our staff, but also to roll that out amongst other providers in the city. And I think I'll keep this brief. Really excitingly, people may have seen in the media the week before last, there was an announcement of £40 million worth of capital funding from Lloyds Bank via Homewards to develop new supported accommodation run and managed by smaller organisations in the 6 Homewards locations and Liverpool. Not sure why and Liverpool, but apparently 6 Homewards. That's 40 million. Apparently it's 50 hours.
Okay.
Yeah, just Chair, if I may, yeah, on the trauma informed forum, I think David sort of alluded to that. Homewards is actually running it through platform, and that's on the 12th of March. But also, as David alluded to, with regards to the works they're doing with Moormeady Primary School, it's a part of a holistic approach to sort of prevent homelessness, working with parents, and hopefully I'll be going there on the 13th to meet the head teacher, parents, and yeah, that's it for me.
It would be great to see a sort of case study from that, perhaps in the end of your report for housing and how that's going. I mean, it ties into the conversations, you know, that our group have been having with the leader around the community integration fund and actually, you know, putting money into preventing issues by dealing with them in the community before they become a burden on service delivery in the future. And, you know, we were probably largely focused on kind of social services in that, but actually those are really key areas for kind of for integration funding to sort of look at across the city. You know, how do we support the community to support itself to kind of, you know, reduce the burden on salary services effectively.
Can I make a suggestion on the menu report? I think that'd be really good. I might suggest we bring it in our mid-year report, just so we've got some really.
Of course, yeah, by all means, yeah, no problem at all, yeah. Cool. That was it from me, I think. Any other questions from any of the committee?
No,
Okay.
Chair,
And we'll go to recommendations now, if that's okay, and I'm looking at Neil for some help.
Yeah, just taking gathering information really. Obviously, I think it's the HMOs by the council, how it translates in bedrooms, get numbers of the data for the veterans.
Yeah.
To see if there was an impact on the rough sleepers task force when Pride in Pill stopped, and getting that case study in the mid-year report.
Yeah.
And other than that, was there any comments or recommendations the committee would like to make?
My only recommendation would be to ensure that review of the strategic forum happens, and that sort of rolls out and continues to kind of provide the governance to the automated transition. Looking to happy with that.
Get some more information gathering than anything else, which I think has been very useful.
Yeah. Any other recommendations the committee would like to make or feel we should make?
I know you asked Chair if we've got all the questions, but I just wanted to check with you. Have you got enough staff? Is you adequately, is the resource that you've been allocated?
Yes, that's a dangerous question.
You've talked about some different training for staff and restructuring. Now, have you had to reskill people and change people around quite dramatically to address this way of this approach?
I think it's an ongoing process as well. I think that, you know, joking aside, the council has invested in we've increased the amount of staff in the department, which I think shows at every level the commitment to try to tackle these issues in a time of real financial constraints. I think that the ways of working that are encapsulated in rapid rehousing, that potentially we're looking at new homelessness legislation being introduced in Wales in potentially in the fairly near future, and that really will change how traditional housing workers will need to engage with people. So I think it is it's an ongoing piece of work to work with. We've got really excellent staff to go. It's really, I did it many years ago now, but frontline housing advice, it's a really difficult job. It can be a really thankless task. And we've got officers who go over and beyond to support their staff and do excellent jobs. But this is a continuous process of adaptation. It's fair to say as well. There's something we're committed to support the staff with.
Yeah, you said got 25 full-time people working to support individuals. I think yes, that sounds a bit similar to what I did many years ago. I don't think we had the complexity then, though, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I was shocked at the 25 statistic because I worked in frontline homelessness in Newport, as you all know, Catherine, and the two of us then, but still one, massive sort of shift from back in those days. So the scale of the challenge, you know, just shows the enormity of that, doesn't it? Oh, absolutely. The worst part was you still filling who 12s. Oh my God. Okay, well, that's another story. That's it on recommendations then and the report. So thank you all for your attendance and conversation and debate on the report and for the presentations. But I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody. Thank you on the screen.
Thanks.
Members, we've got a couple of sort of items just to finish off really, and the scrutiny item report. So, don't think we'll be too long. So happy just to plough on rather than have a break. Yeah.
I'll fill the 2 years to me.
Sorry, that's all right. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Chair,
Yeah.
just a quick one. Apologies, I had to turn my camera off quite a few times. My kids are off school sick, and they were interrupting a bit, so it was easier to keep it off. So apologies for the on and off of my camera today.
No, that's okay. No problem at all. So we're on to scrutiny advisors reports next, page 77 to 88 of the report and actions arising. You want to run through, Neil?
Thank you very much, Chair. So from page 81, actions monitoring, just chased up a couple of actions from the 25th of November meeting. The majority of them have been completed now. Same for the outcomes as well on page 83, and the majority have been sent over. Just waiting on about the information from the 17th of February meeting. Fix them up again in the week. As soon as I get the information from officers, I'll forward them on to the committee. We're currently meeting with directors and heads of service at the moment to discuss draft forward work programs for the 4 committees. Currently going to be seeing the social services directorate this week. We're hoping we'll have something together over the next couple of weeks. So we'll shortly be sending out emails to send placeholder dates for the upcoming meetings. So we just showed the chair earlier. We're expecting a meeting in June where we'll be discussing the housing, affordable housing prospectus, looking for the 9th of June for that one.
One of the things that sort of been thinking about, is in terms of the actions that arise, and obviously you then sort of get the information from head of service or whoever, and you email that to us.
Yes.
But that never ever gets captured in any sort of, so we see that, but nobody else sees that apart from the committee. And I wonder whether, we ought to be, though that information ought to be in the public domain. And so there should be a link in the report to that paper that sort of said or the response. Because I was sort of looking through some of these and I was thinking, oh, you sort of said all completed and sent to the committee, and then I kind of looking back through emails thinking, I don't remember seeing that one. It's like going back and double checking. And I think it'd be really useful if we sort of captured those in a doc. So if you refer back, you can kind of click and see the response. And also other members that read these papers ought to be able to see the response. They ought to be for our eyes only.
I don't remember us asking that question.
Yeah.
We can look at that. We're also discussing with the team how we can improve, displaying this information. So, for example, with some of them, we don't know what, say, for example, recommendation to cabinet member and officers, if they have taken on the recommendation that we've made, and if not, what was the reason why? So we're looking to incorporate that in a new
That's about our function here, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we are looking at stuff like
And
that.
the impact that we have.
So we'll take that feedback on board as well, Chair, about including our information as well, how to locate that.
Yeah, and it would be really useful if they decline their recommendation. Yeah, the reasons why, because that can come back to scrutiny for us to think about whether that's right or wrong or whatever, or whether we should.
Yeah, they
that
said somebody else is wrong, don't
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, so it'd be good to sort of review that, I think, and have a look about how we sort of get those actions done completed. Everybody happy with that? Yeah. And in terms of the forward work programme, I do sort of encourage everybody to sort of try and think about, what we look at, what we scrutinise. This is your opportunity to look at areas that, we don't normally get to look at, and what has happened you know, since I've been on this committee anyway, is that we tend to only look at the items that officers tell us we need to scrutinise. So things that are going into the public domain or going into sort of cabinet for approval, you know, highways asset management plan, for example, this sort of housing transition plan, local development plan, transformation, placemaking plan will all come to us. But, you know, there are things that come up in the course of our business, particularly in the mid and end of service reviews, which we indicate that we would like more detail on. Those are the opportunities to pull to committee. So I do encourage you to sort of impact on or input rather on the things that we look at, and so that we drive our own agenda for scrutiny rather than just the things that people want us to look at. Because normally when people want us to look at them, they're comfortable with what they're showing, but when you actually go and ask for things that they don't want you to look at, then you get different answers. So, you know, I think that our role here is to unpick some of the detail, and I do encourage you to suggest areas that we look at.
Yeah, I mean, we have to play, so we need to the other groups look at the civil enforcement.
Civil enforcement will fall
Yeah.
under this.
Sorry,
Civil enforcement will fall under it.
it does, because
Yeah.
we've never actually looked at effectiveness or, you know, what, because I do remember some occasionally seeing statements about it, like there were only 4 councils reporting to it or something. Right? And we're the only ones who are actually making a net gain out of it. And I wondered, you know, how that balances out. How responsive are they? Because there are issues which I've tried to raise. We're not even getting any response on it, and it seems to be that the whole thing is managed.
There are certain topics, for example, councillor, we could request them as information reports.
Yeah.
So if the officers would send you all the information report and that's still, you still want to look into things further, then we request for them. I think we added onto the full work programme. That's another way we can get information for us.
We could certainly review, you know, what has it been, sort of 3 years since we've had those
Yeah,
plans now?
there are things which are weak points which have been disadvantageous to perhaps people living in a particular area where there is enforcement. Now, obviously, I know a lot of areas we have no interest. You know, I'm particularly interested in that, unless you come and park illegally in town.
Well, exactly. No,
Yeah.
but there are areas of Bronchton
Yeah.
where, we do have parking issues. And it would be interesting to know how effective they have been.
And actually, what's the management structure behind it? You know, because that's been rather hazy in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, how is it managed? What impact, has it had on, you know, there must have been, I wasn't a councillor when those powers were agreed, but there must have been an intention behind it as to what it was going to achieve in terms of purpose. So, you know, I presume sort of better parking in the city centre would be one of them, or whatever.
It's been broadly very welcome, but there's an ongoing thing now about the books of tickets. People can buy 30 tickets for visitors to their house, but actually they'll get booked if a contractor has to come to the house. Think about the demographics of houses or the state of houses in Bainswell. Many of them are older and they need stuff doing to them. They need new roofs and, you know, big, quite substantial repairs. If you've got contractors there for a week, and contractors don't usually allow singly, do they? If you need them done, then you need an electrician as well, and a painter afterwards. And they're giving away all that consignment. And I've written several times about this. We're not getting anywhere with this.
I mean, I would be happy to look at sort of, the review of the whole kind of introduction of powers for civil enforcement, and
how
given that there's an intention to extend them as well to move in traffic violations and all the rest.
Yes.
Then, you know,
Exactly, because that is coming up as well.
We can ask for an information report. Really, has it achieved the objectives it's set, and what's next? And then, if we want to bring it to committee, we can do. Is everybody happy with that?
It took a very long time to bring in, and
everyone's nodding, so it's fine.
A bit more feedback on it.
Yeah, I mean the report on the bus services, which I have to confess I haven't fully read yet, but which come through from Stephen Jarrett. I guess that was prompted by us asking for information about the sort of buses. So that's the type of thing that we can ask.
Yeah.
So we didn't really want. I'm sorry, I'm generalising, but I certainly didn't understand how buses and subsidies and everything worked in the city. And I think we got the impression from that meeting we had in the chamber back last year that neither did lots of the people who were at the
It
meeting.
certainly didn't seem that way.
So the report is there now, and if people want to scrutinise that further, we can call officers to come and ask questions about it. So please, digest the report and come back with any suggestions or feedback, or come back and say to Timothy, no, we want to bring them in front of us to discuss it.
I've recently joined the Newport City Transport Board, but I've only been to 2 meetings, and I have to say I don't feel, there's such a lot to sort of understand about how they operate.
Well,
I don't really feel I'm in a position to sort of challenge them or really understand some of the reports that I've given out with no explanation.
well, yeah, I mean, it's a particular area of frustration for me personally, because whenever I ask questions about Newport transport, people tell me at the council it's nothing to do with us.
Well, I wasn't
So,
aware how
but
the
we're
councillors
the
dealt.
100% stakeholder, and if you look on companies' house, Newport Transport, Newport Council own all the shares and are the person with significant control. So as far as I'm concerned, whilst it's an individual company, the council holds all the cards and can
But
direct that.
we
So,
do have
you know,
councillors who are board members.
yeah, so
There should at least be able to be a mechanism for feedback.
absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's that bit that, so once we've digested this report, if there are more questions to come out of it, then we can, call officers in to come and talk to us.
Yeah, Chair, sorry, I'm on the board as well. I think Newport Transport manages and looks after the running of the buses themselves and financial aspects. And the council's in charge of bus stops and the actual physical stops and the like. But as Kate said, we're on the board. We do have an input. I can guide them on the direction or something, but it's been outsourced, and the government, I think, is under the Thatcher years, outsourced it all.
Wondering whether for them, the partnerships committee chair.
It may do, it may do. But let's have a look at that transport report, and then we can, And again, if there are other things, please bring them to the attention of the committee, things that we want to look at and investigate, and we can unpick.
Yeah. You'll have to tell me, Malcolm, how long it'll take me to get up to speed with that.
Just have a look, Kate. Have a look on. You can Google or whatever, and Newport Transport, and it tells you how it was all made up. As years ago when it was all run by authorities, and I think it was Margaret Thatcher days. She outsourced everything, went to privatisation and deregulated. That was the word, Kate.
Okay. Any other questions, issues? Is that
We're still live. We're still live, Chair.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, we're still live. Yeah.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah. So the forward work programme, Neil will send that around as well. Councillor Screen, did you have your hand up? Sorry.
Yes, Chair. Just declare an interest on the bus, because I'm on the scrutiny committee for the Cardiff Capital Region, and we've just produced a report. And I think the key things are, one is the funding, the future funding of the bus service, how that is going to be carried out, and secondly, the management of the bus service, whether it'll be controlled centrally or devolved to local authorities. So just to let you know that. Thank you.
No, thanks, Councillor.
That would be interesting. Yes, thank you.
Any other questions, comments from the committee? Okay, next meeting is that one proposed on the 9th of June, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
So in a few weeks, we'll have a draft work programme to send to committees, and we'll also send out a placeholder appointment, so we're in the diaries.
Yeah, and then we'll have the usual end of year reports then for July, so the 2 meetings, 2 long meetings.
Please accept my apologies for the June meeting.
Okay, no problem.
And away in July, first week, 3rd to the 12th.
You won't be here anyway, you won't be on this
No,
committee.
I won't be.
So no need to know your apologies.
Well, it's a bit funny, isn't it? Because we've had conversations first. Are we still live?
So we can go offline. Oh, sorry, we just need to do the minutes of the last meeting, yeah? Apologies, I'm happy with them. Anybody else happy with the minutes of the last meeting? Yeah. Okay. Okay, minutes agreed for the last meeting as well, and we can go offline then.
Cheers.